Good evening and welcome to Novara Live. My name's Stephen Methven, and tonight I'm joined for the first time by Novara Media's own Harriet Williamson. Harriet, how are you?
I'm really good, thank you, Stephen. I'm so happy to be here with you tonight.
Very happy to have you here, Harriet. Now, some of our audience will have seen you on some previous shows. You were on once talking about your work on the police and cybercrimes, another time talking about your work on the Priory. But for those who don't know you, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm usually actually behind the camera doing script writing for Novara Live, and I also work with the articles team on opinion investigations, analyses, and features. I've been working in journalism for quite a long time now. I'm a former editor at The Independent and at Pink News.
Right, well, let's get on with the show. We'll come to Harriet a little bit later. Coming up tonight, we've got an interview with lawyer Hassan Jabareen on what life is like for Palestinian citizens of Israel. Donald Trump is set to announce his latest round of tariffs, and a group of renters win their case against a billionaire landlord. Israel's Defense Minister Israel Katz has announced a massive expansion of the country's ground assault on Gaza. In a statement, Katz said this: Operation Strength and Sword is expanding alongside the wide-scale evacuation of the Gazan population from combat zones, crushing and cleansing the area of terrorists and terror infrastructure, and seizing large areas that will be added to the security zones of the State of Israel to protect the fighting forces and the communities. I call on the residents of Gaza to act now to remove Hamas and return all the hostages. This is the only way to end the war. So, a land grab. Israel has already claimed 17%, or 62 square kilometers of Gaza, according to Israel rights group Gisha, as part of a buffer zone around the edges of the Palestinian enclave. Katz's statement came after Israeli forces began that expanded operation on Tuesday night, with attacks on the enclave carried out by the Air Force and Navy and tanks spotted advancing towards Rafah. At least 50 Palestinians across Gaza have been killed by the Israeli military today, including 17 people who were sheltering in this house in Khan Yunis in the south of the Strip. 5 of those killed were women, and one of them was pregnant, according to reports from the Nasser hospital where their bodies were taken. 2 were children. Riham Abu Kaoud was amongst the relatives mourning those killed in the Khan Yunis strike today. She said this to Reuters.
Our whole family is gone. My cousin, who is newly married, is left. My other cousin, who is married and lives next to them. All of them went to visit my grandmother yesterday. They went and bid my grandmother farewell yesterday. My cousin is pregnant. She got married and got pregnant recently. She's been married for a year and a half, from the start of the war. She was happy only recently. She was my friend, with me my whole life. We were never separated for one day, except when I was displaced from Rafah, I didn't speak to her. She was speaking to me the day before. She was worried about the pregnancy. What can I do? My uncle's children are young, 3 months and a year.
Absolute agony there. Israel also struck the north of the Gaza Strip. Amongst the targets was this United Nations clinic in northern Gaza's Jabalia refugee camp, hit by Israeli missiles. The clinic was being used as a shelter by displaced families. At least 19 people, including 9 children, were killed in that airstrike. Over 1,100 Palestinians have been killed since Israel broke the ceasefire just 2 weeks ago. And as we reported earlier this week, at least 15 of them were paramedics and other rescue workers killed while attempting to respond to Israeli strikes in Rafah. Their bodies were recovered from a mass grave on Monday by a second rescue crew that had gone in search of them after they disappeared last week. The Israeli military has now admitted opening fire on the ambulances and fire truck in which the killed rescue workers were traveling. But new details have now emerged which throw Israel's story into doubt, with a senior doctor who examined the bodies reporting that their hands were tied. Dr. Ahmed Al-Farah gave this description of the recovered bodies. I was able to see 3 bodies when they were transferred to the Nasser hospital. They had bullets in their chest and head. They were executed. They had their hands tied. They tied them so they were unable to move, and then they killed them. A second witness who was involved in the recovery has confirmed the doctor's account. So what we're talking about is the mass execution of essential medical workers who are out in the field trying to save lives. A truly horrific war crime. But that's just the latest in a long list of war crimes committed by the Israeli military in Gaza, including, of course, the crime of genocide, crimes that Israel is never made to answer for. A year ago, On the 1st of April 2024, a World Central Kitchen convoy of 3 vehicles carrying humanitarian workers was hit by repeated Israeli drone strikes in Gaza. The first vehicle was hit by a missile from a Hermes 450 drone. People could then be seen emerging from the struck vehicle and getting into one of the other cars. At that point, the aid workers reportedly notified the IDF that they had been struck. Seconds later, a missile hit the second car. Passengers from the third car then tried to pick up those who had survived the second strike. A third missile then struck them. All 7 World Central Kitchen workers in that convoy were killed. And yet no one in Israel has ever been forced to answer for that war crime. 3 of those killed were British citizens, and yet the government, our government, has completely failed to seek justice for their murders. One of them was John Chapman. His MP, Neil Duncan Jordan, asked Foreign Secretary David Lammy what was being done to get justice for him.
A year ago today, my constituent, John Chapman, was murdered by the Israeli Defence Force while working for World Central Kitchen, delivering humanitarian aid in Gaza. His family now want to know when the Israeli government is going to bring criminal charges against the perpetrators, when they will be awarded compensation for their tragic loss, and what our government is doing to ensure justice prevails.
Well, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for that question. Last month, I pressed Foreign Minister Saar to conclude the Military Advocate General's consideration of the World Central Kitchen incident, including determining whether criminal proceedings should be initiated. I've met the families of those killed in the attacks and assured them that this government will continue to support their calls for justice. Gaza is the most dangerous place in the world to be an aid worker, with over 400 killed since the start of this conflict. We need to see lasting safety improvements for aid workers on the ground, and that is a fitting legacy to those British individuals that have lost their lives.
A fitting legacy? What legacy? Aid workers continue to be killed en masse in Gaza, with the recent apparent executions of rescue workers whose bodies were simply dumped and buried in the sand, the latest horrific act of barbarism by Israel's military. And our own Foreign Secretary, who has done absolutely nothing to sanction Israel over the murder of British citizens, let alone over the killing of tens of thousands of Palestinians, want to call that horror a fitting legacy of the World Central Kitchen volunteers who were blown up by Israeli missiles. And just so you know, events leading up to the killing of those volunteers may well have been filmed by a Royal Air Force surveillance plane doing reconnaissance over Gaza that day. That's according to Declassified, who also report that the UK government has continually refused to publish it. So when David Lammy laments the killing of aid workers in Gaza and calls for lasting improvements, just remember that he has done absolutely nothing to seek justice for a single one of the over 400 rescue workers, humanitarian workers, aid workers who have so far been killed in the Strip, including those 3 British citizens. And as Israel now expands its operations in Gaza in a genocidal land grab, we're going to see more civilians killed and more aid workers targeted. Where are the sanctions from our government? Where are the embargoes? Where are the charges brought in the international court? Absolutely nowhere to be seen. Harriet, what did you make of David Lammy's comments there?
Well, Stephen, it's absolutely beyond insulting. And it's good to know, I know this has been said before on this programme, but it's good to know that if I went to Gaza and Israel killed me, that this British government, this Labour government, would not lift a finger to do anything to bring about justice for my death. And that's not even to start talking about the tens of thousands of Palestinian lives that have been lost in this brutal genocide against a people who have been oppressed for decades and decades. I think we have an incredibly spineless Foreign Secretary. I believe this Labour government has blood on its hands. And it's very telling that in that set of parliamentary questions, David Lammy only answered really that one question on the World Central Kitchen aid workers who had been killed. After that, he sent out the parliamentary undersecretary, Hamish Faulkner, to answer the rest of the questions on Gaza, which just shows how much he prioritises this issue. And Hamish Faulkner repeated the same lines, that Gaza is the most dangerous place in the world to be an aid worker, Why is Gaza the most dangerous place in the world to be an aid worker? Well, it's because of the Israeli military's continuing war crimes and continuing genocide. Faulkner actually had the nerve to say this cannot continue, but he's still emailing constituents and defending in those emails the refusal to suspend F-35 licenses to Israel because apparently that could compromise the security of Ukraine. The family members of these World Central Kitchen workers have spoken to the press, and James Kirby, who's one of the killed aid workers, his cousin Louise Kirby, said today that the lack of justice and accountability around his death has been equally devastating to the pain of losing him. And David Lammy might say that he has spoken to the families of victims and he's advocating on their behalf. But Louise Kirby says that despite repeated calls for answers, the family has actually been met by silence from the UK government. Silence. She says it's disheartening to note that after all this time, we still have no concrete proof of accountability. She called their response empty apologies. I wonder what David Lammy's got to say for that. Or Hamish Faulkner.
Well, probably nothing, probably nothing at all. And I think that point you make about, if you were to, this idea that if you were to go and be killed, the British government just wouldn't care at all, shows a real contempt for the lives of actually very brave British citizens who might want to go and volunteer to help out in a disastrous situation, a genocidal situation that they might feel some responsibility for, because of course the UK government is completely complicit in it. I remember when the World Central Kitchen killings happened, Aaron Bastani was in the studio with me, and there had been some talk at the time of perhaps some of us going to Israel to report on Gaza, and he was just like, can't happen because you would be killed and nobody would do anything about it. And at the time I remember thinking, I don't know about that, but actually I think he was completely right, just as you are completely right in what you've just said. Our focus during Israel's genocide in Gaza has been quite rightly on the relentless assault on Palestinians in the Strip and the various weapons of war, from bombs and bullets to starvation, harassment, arbitrary detention, and humiliation used by Israel against them. We've also covered Israel's growing military presence in the occupied West Bank, including the forced displacement of tens of thousands of Palestinians from their homes as Israel seeks to annex those territories too. But there are also Palestinians who are Israeli citizens, over 2 million of them. They're second-class citizens, of course, subject to Israeli apartheid. I wanted to find out how life had changed for them since Israel's onslaught on Gaza began 18 months ago. Adallah is a legal center for Palestinians in Haifa, aiming to protect the rights of Palestinians in Israel, as well as across Gaza and the occupied territories. Earlier today, I spoke to its founder and director, Hassan Jabareen, and I began by asking him what it's like being a citizen of a state seeking to exterminate your people just across the border.
It's very, very difficult to be a citizen of a state that this state refer to you and to your people as the enemy that should be killed. And to see what's going in Gaza, the genocide that the people passed, and you know that you are under the direct rule of the same state that committed this genocide, of course, but for you, feeling of fear, and you are in a situation of you feel that nothing politically stable, it might happen to you. I am not the person who like to bring radical images or radical comparison, and I am belong to people who view the Holocaust as one and maybe the most horrible international crime that happened in the modern history. However, sometimes to compare, it helps us to understand what's going on. I feel personally walking in Haifa and in Tel Aviv and in the other Israeli cities, similar, I think, to the feeling of a Jewish person who's walking in Berlin, 1933, 1934, that he's feeling that he belongs to something, that the state that view him as enemy, a racist state against him and against his people, state that ready to do everything. So if I want to be honest in my answer, this is my answer about the feeling, because I am a person also who's aware about the literature of the Jewish literature about living in Berlin in that time. And sometimes I compare to that feeling. Yesterday, Israeli Jewish friend sent me message via the mobile, and he said, Hassan, I decided to immigrate, to leave the country. I don't want my kids to grow in such a state like Israel. And I tried to tell him, we need you. We need you to struggle here. And he said, no, as the Jews left Berlin and Germany before it happened, I am feeling that I want to leave before the disaster comes. For me, we live the disaster. For him, the disaster is going to come. Among the Palestinian and Israel, we are passing something similar to slow genocide. What we are passing, Israel police, led by the most racist official person in Israel, his name Billionaire. His job is to prosecute Arabs, to chase Arabs, and to make their life very, very difficult. Now, the Israeli police has policy that to withdraw the rule of law and the applicability of rule of law from our towns and villages, and to let us kill each other like crimes, and let the crimes to celebrate. We reach the highest average in the world. We have the average of 15 persons per 100,000. 15 persons are killed vis-a-vis 100,000. If you want to compare our situation in West Bank and Gaza, that we are the same people, Palestinians, they have 1.6 vis-a-vis 100,000. In Jordan, the same people, the same. So we became, if we compare ourselves to the world, we are the highest in the world. The only states that they can compete with us is Latin American states. And this let the people feel that they are not secure in their homes, that the private security is lost. And this is the most important thing, that any state should provide for you private security. And Israel let us kill each other, let the crime celebrate. So you have genocide in Gaza, you are destroying refugee camps in West Bank, and we had the slow killing in our society, which it make it lack of personal security.
Hassan, I want to ask how the Israeli state has been treating those Palestinians who are citizens of the state, so within its own borders, since its genocide in Gaza began. Have you seen increased repression, more repression of freedom of speech? What's changed, if anything?
Immediately after the 7th of October, the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, in his speech, he put the targets. He said that Israel army and Israel security apparatus going to face 4 fronts: the front of Gaza, West Bank, and the north, meaning Hezbollah and Iran, and the internal front. The internal front meaning the Palestinian citizens of Israel. Immediately, he put us in situation that we are not just enemy, that enemy that it's allowed to kill, it's enemy that it's allowed to fight. And immediately after this announcement, the Minister of the Police, Ben-Gvir, called the Jewish community, the civilian Jewish community, and offered them to be armed. And they start to circulate arms to the Jewish community, Jewish citizens, not soldiers. And that was a key, to defend yourself from your neighbor, not to defend the North Front, or not to go to fight in Gaza, because there you have soldiers, but to defend yourself from your neighbor, a Palestinian neighbor. We are the only group in the world that were not allowed to protest or to demonstrate against the war. And we went to the Israeli Supreme Court against this ban, and we lost the case. The Israeli Supreme Court supported the police in this case. And then we started to see high number of indictment against men and women on the name of incitements. How? When you don't have demonstrations, so they target the people that what they wrote in their Facebook. So based on what you wrote in Facebook, they start to indict you as you incite for terror.
Now, Hassan, you run Adala, a legal center in Haifa, Israel, which is aimed at protecting the rights of Palestinians who are also Israeli citizens, as well as Palestinians in the occupied territories and Gaza. One of the things that has come out of this genocide is the treatment of Palestinians from Gaza and from the occupied territories in Israeli detention centers. Israeli citizens who are also Palestinians, presumably, they get taken to Israeli prisons, Israeli jails. How are they treated when they're there?
All of those security that they are classified as security detainees or prisoners, they are treated the same, whether you are from Gaza or West Bank or citizen of Israel, whether you are Nukhba, whether you are a Palestinian fighter, whether you killed people or just wrote something in your Facebook, the same. So the same treatment they had, the treatment that almost starving the people, almost put for them the minimum of the food, and not respecting any basic rights of them as prisoners, and no family visit for them, and the lawyers visit to them is very, very limited. The number of the people that they die on the prison in the last 2 years is the highest since the occupation, since 1967. We faced this. People got from the prison, and they tell about horrible stories, horrible treatments from the prison authority against them. And of course, you look at how they enter and how they left the prison. Like many of them lost weight because the starving policy there. And cases submitted to the Supreme Court, and they were dismissed also the same.
Now, I recently read that Palestinian citizens of Israel who are women are particularly harshly treated by the police at the moment. Can you tell us some more about that?
Their number of arrests is very high. And we didn't know what the reason. Higher than the men. Usually, the men number of detainees, the number of the men that they are in the prison higher. The men that caught and classified as detainees higher than the women. And then what we found that many of them, they were detained in order to exchange them with Hamas. Because if you remember, the first round with Hamas in November was that Hamas release Israeli women and Israel will release Palestinian women. So and they didn't speak about the names of Palestinian women. So Israel, in order to fill this niche, they took Palestinian women and they released them within this exchange. And those women were against, and their parents were against, and their lawyers against, because if you are exchanged in this deal, you have no future in Israel. You cannot continue your studying. They will tell you, well, you are exchanged as terrorists. You are here just because Hamas succeeded to kidnap Israelis and to kill Israelis, and this is why you are released. Otherwise, you won't be released. So they will treat you fully as enemy.
Sorry, Hassan, I just want to get that straight. So Israeli police have arrested and imprisoned Palestinian women who are citizens of Israel, taking them as, I don't know, kind of hostages, and then releasing them during prisoner exchanges with Hamas, therefore having them kind of labeled as terrorists by Israeli society and ruining their future prospects in Israel, which is their home country.
Yeah, but Israel didn't take them as hostages. Israel put them in jail based on indictment that you support terror. And then they exchanged it. And we knew that without their agreement, without letting the trial going on. And they said, we are not guilty. Don't exchange us. We want to show that we are not guilty. So they didn't have the possibility to struggle that they are not guilty. The only possibility that decided by Israel to exchange you with Hamas, meaning you are hostage vis-a-vis hostage, that you are terrorist vis-a-vis our civilians.
It's something of a bleak question, Hassan, but I wanted to ask you, given Israel's genocidal action in Gaza, what do you see in the future for Palestinians in the region, in Gaza, in the occupied territories, and indeed in Israel?
Now we still live the moment. We still live the horrible moment. And this shows something bad about the international law. That the international law didn't work. After the Second World War, it was expected that any genocide, the international law will work. The international community will do something to stop it. But if we speak about international community today as the strong side is EU or the Western European country and US, we don't see this side. So this give you, as a human rights lawyer, deep frustration from the international community, from the international law for human rights, that they cannot protect you when they are needed. And it shows that law is only pure power. It's not legal book, only based on power.
It's Liberation Day. At least that's what US President Donald Trump is calling it ahead of his announcement due later tonight of a fresh round of tariffs on goods from America's global trading partners. Now, nobody outside of Trump's team knows exactly what the president will announce later this evening, but that isn't stopping his supporters from sounding pretty evangelical about the measures ahead. This was Small Business Administrator Kelly Loeffler on Fox News.
This is an exciting day, Liberation Day. This is the single greatest salvation for not just small businesses, but for America. This country was traveling down an unsustainable path, and President Trump has been the only president that has had backbone to stand up to our allies and adversaries alike and say, we have to level the playing field. This is unfair. You're no longer going to take advantage of us. And man, I would not bet against America right now, because what's happening is you see investment coming in. You see $4 trillion in investment already in President Trump's first 2 months. You see trading partners coming to the table, wanting to renegotiate. This is what it's about. It's about restoring fairness and opportunity to this nation, from small businesses to workers, to our investments. And that's what this is about. And President Trump understands that.
Does he understand that? Does he, though? I mean, I'm not sure I'm seeing a kind of regeneration of America. What I'm seeing is a building global trade war about to kick off. Now, reports from inside the White House suggest that Trump is looking at two different models for imposing global tariffs. This is from the New York Times. The administration has been weighing several different tariff strategies in recent weeks. One option examined by the White House is a 20% flat tariff on all imports, which advisors have said could help raise more than $6 trillion in revenue for the US government. But advisors have also discussed the idea of assigning different tariff levels to countries depending on the trade barriers those countries impose against American products. They've also said that some nations might avoid tariffs entirely by striking trade deals with the United States. Now, that lack of certainty over the scope as well as the level of tariffs has left the US financial markets pretty skittish. Last night, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt was asked about the risks to investments like, for example, pensions attached to the new measures.
Tomorrow's announcement is to protect future generations. The senior citizens you mentioned, it's for their kids and their grandkids to ensure that there are jobs here in the United States of America for their children to live the American dream, just like they presumably did. And as for their worries about their 401ks, their Social Security, I just addressed Social Security. This president is always going to protect it for our tax-paying senior citizens. As for their 401ks, look at what President Trump did for you in his first term. He is working on implementing that economic formula every single day by lowering inflation, lowering energy prices, massive deregulatory efforts, while simultaneously effectively implementing tariffs. And they'll hear more about that announcement tomorrow.
Very, very unlikely that inflation is going to be lowered by these tariffs. The mystery surrounding the full extent and nature of the tariffs has also raised doubts about the strategy of Trump's tariff team. This was also from that press conference.
The president right now is with the trade and tariff team. They are very confident that this is all going to work. But
Yes.
What if they're wrong?
They're not going to be wrong. It is going to work. And the president has a brilliant team of advisors who have been studying these issues for decades. We are focused on restoring the golden age of America and making America a manufacturing superpower. And again, Peter, I would point you to the investments that have already trickled into this country. And the president hasn't even made his tariff announcement yet tomorrow. There have been billions of dollars in private investments from around the world pouring into American communities. What does that look like for those watching at home, for the people you mentioned worried about their own economic circumstances? It means more jobs in your communities, which means more money, more investments, more money in your pocket. That's what the president is committed to.
It's going to work. It's going to work. It's going to work. I promise. Recent polling by YouGov for US broadcaster CBS suggests that Americans aren't really buying what Trump is selling. Rather than focusing on tariffs, people want Trump to focus more on lowering prices, with 64% of respondents saying he wasn't doing enough to make their money go further. After all, the price of eggs was a big ticket issue in Trump's campaign. Meanwhile, 55% said he was focusing too much on tariffs. Now, Trump's argument is that restricting imports into the States from foreign providers will lead to a kind of reindustrialization of the country, meaning more money being spent on the US's own outputs rather than those of other nations. But what those polls suggest is that either Americans aren't buying that argument because they don't see the link between tariffs and lower prices, and many economists don't see that link either, or they do buy the argument, but they see the price-lowering effects as happening too far off into the future. Now, Trump has already imposed additional tariffs on oil imports from China of 20%. He's also put levies of 25% on all US imports of steel and aluminium, plus a long list of products made with those metals. And early last month, he tried to put 25% tariffs on all imports from Mexico and Canada. He said this was to force them to reduce illegal immigration and the flow of the killer opioid fentanyl into the US. Now, Trump later softened those tariffs. But any tariffs announced today will be on top of those already in place. So quite an escalation. Now, there's one term that you'll hear a lot from Trump and his team when it comes to the new levies. He's been calling them reciprocal tariffs. But what does that mean? Well, that implies that Trump is simply looking to balance the trade books directly. If you charge X% to import from the States, I'll charge X% to import from you. But things are a little more complicated, with the president regularly using the word reciprocal to actually mean retaliation against non-tariff barriers to trade. For example, the European Union has come in for particular anger from the administration for its regulatory framework that keeps, let's be frank, inferior US products out of the market. Now, EU leaders are bracing themselves for double-digit tariffs on their exports to the US. But they're also preparing a response. The European Commission has said it will retaliate in a single strike to any new tariffs, which will be in addition to the existing steel and aluminium levies. The EU responded to the steel and aluminium tariffs with a bundle of countermeasures on American goods valued at around 26 billion euros. Now, one thing that will likely be in the package announced later today is a tariff on automobile imports after Trump announced his intention to impose them last week. That's likely to have a pretty big impact on the UK. If they hit this country, more than 25,000 jobs in the car industry will be at risk. The US is currently the second biggest export market for UK cars and car parts after the EU at a value of around £8 billion. Speaking in Prime Minister's questions, Prime Minister Keir Starmer addressed the risk of tariffs on UK goods.
Mr. Speaker, we've been preparing for all eventualities ahead of the confirmation of US tariffs later today. Let me be clear with the House. A trade war is in nobody's interests. And the country deserves, and we will take, a calm, pragmatic approach. That's why we're working with all industries and sectors likely to be impacted. Our decisions will always be guided by our national interest, and that's why we have prepared for all eventualities, and we will rule nothing out.
Now, it sounds a lot to me like the government is preparing to be hit by tariffs, but it's unlikely to follow the EU's route of countermeasures. Instead, Keir Starmer is reported to be offering concessions to US tech firms. The Guardian reports that the Prime Minister has offered tax breaks for big US tech firms in return for lower Trump tariffs. They'll be delighted by that, given they barely pay tax already. And it's not no tariffs. He's not saying we'll give you these tax breaks if you exempt us from tariffs. Just lower ones. It's kind of embarrassing, sort of lame appeasement. But on LBC, one caller had a much bolder idea.
He is a bully, but we don't need to leave this decision to Starmer or any other politician. We can make decisions ourselves. Money talks, we just stop buying American goods where we can. Let's say to the last caller, or where we are too small to make a difference. Well, rather than looking at doing things through politicians and on a European basis, I mean, somebody just needs to start a movement like that young teenager did with the environment. Let's stop buying American goods, get off Twitter, don't buy Tesla, don't use Amazon, and they would soon start coming around. And then you can forget about tariffs. It doesn't matter. We wouldn't be paying a 25% tariff because we wouldn't be buying the goods.
The White House is going to be announcing the new package of global tariffs at 9 o'clock this evening, possibly off the back of a cigarette pack. Tomorrow could bring a whole new world. Harriet, what do you make of Starmer's softly response to the threat of US tariffs on UK goods?
Well, I think that in life, sometimes there is quite a lot of value in not rushing in headlong and making a snap decision straight away. Just waiting, seeing how things unfold, and then acting. But in this instance, I'm really not prepared to extend that to Keir Starmer. Tariffs have been a possibility for a long time now. The government should be prepared. It should have a strategy. It should know what it's doing. Starmer's pontificating. He's acting like he either has an ace up his sleeve or he's just hoping that this mythical trade deal with the US is going to drop into his lap. And I mean, we've been trying to get this trade deal since 2020. Since before that, it was meant to be the jewel in the crown of the leaving the EU via Brexit. Negotiations did stop during Joe Biden's presidency, but they have started up again under Trump. But it feels like we're really no further forward, even though we have Tory MPs like Harriet Baldwin today on Politics Live trying to take credit for this trade deal, saying that all the work was put in under the last Conservative government. But it hasn't even happened yet. We don't even have it. What we have is Keir Starmer really proving the point that the UK is nothing more than a vassal state to the US. We're just like a little chihuahua running up behind a big dog and yapping and hoping to sort of get in on the action, but we're not really anywhere. The special relationship has been proved to be absolute nonsense. And I do have some sympathy with people who say that maybe the only good thing about the Trump presidency is that it showed the truth of the fact that the special relationship is just nothing, and that we shouldn't rely on it. And I think that Starmer's plan to sort of make these concessions to big tech in the digital services tax is essentially a really humiliating capitulation. These are exactly the people, the companies that we should not be exempting from any tax, and it won't even give us a big result, i.e. no tariffs. In this country, we've just been hit with awful April yesterday, and there were some very good segments on this very show about our water bills going up, our energy costs going up, our mobile phone, telecoms costs, they're all rising. They are rising higher than the pace of inflation. Our wages are not climbing to meet them. And what is Keir Starmer doing about that? He is not protecting it. This Labour government is not protecting ordinary people in the UK from these spiralling costs, while private water companies who hold a natural monopoly on the market continue to essentially laugh in our faces by taking massive water bills and paying dividends to their shareholders. They might now be saying that that they're actually using that money to invest in infrastructure, but the government should be telling them to put back the money themselves. We should be clawing that money back for the consumer, not passing the price rises on. I think that any sort of concession in terms of the digital services tax to big tech is absolutely the wrong thing to do. And it's an example of Starmer's government's wrong-headedness. And essentially, the way that I think this Labour government has shown that it is unable to stand up to bullies. Trump's a bully, Israel's a bully, Starmer cannot stand up to them.
I want to ask you what you made of this story that was reported yesterday, I think, about JD Vance suggesting that tariffs on the UK could be dropped if Keir Starmer, enforces or protects free speech more. And I think it was in the wake of an anti-abortion protester being arrested for violating the law that says they can only approach clinics. They can only protest at a certain distance from clinics. So, does that show you something about the manipulative nature of these tariffs potentially applied to the UK? And also maybe JD Vance's sense that Keir Starmer is an easy touch who might be politically manipulable.
Yeah, I think that's definitely what it shows. I think you're absolutely right, Steve. And I think that Keir Starmer has really proved himself to be easily manipulable. The story that you're mentioning, somebody violated a buffer zone. But it's very interesting with people like JD Vance because they're all free speech. They are very pro free speech, but it's only the free speech that they actually want. So it's really not pro free speech particularly at all. I mean, you're seeing in the US that people who are in America on student visas are being arrested and deported by ICE at the behest of Trump's administration for taking part in pro-Palestinian anti-genocide protest action on campuses. They are being arrested, handcuffed, taken off the streets, and then thrown into detention. This is not an administration that cares about freedom of speech. This is just JD Vance is almost pushing Keir Starmer. Oh, I didn't like what you did there, so maybe you should commit to this thing that I say I want. And then obviously we can argue that they don't really care about free speech at all. And then maybe we'll relent on tariffs. It's almost like a blackmail thing. If you concede on one thing, they ask for another thing. They've got you over a barrel the entire time. There will be no end to it. There'll never be a point where Trump and his administration are like, okay, you've done enough for us. They'll just keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And yeah, Starmer's a soft touch. He's easy to manipulate. I think that this whole thing about we don't want a trade war, Trump's already started one. We're already in a trade war. That ship has very much sailed.
Billionaires often operate well above the law, free to exploit and extract from the rest of us without sanction or recourse. But every now and again, ordinary people operating together in solidarity is enough to topple even the most untouchable hoarder of unearned wealth. And that's exactly what happened earlier this week. A group of tenants in East London has now won £260,000 worth of back rent after a legal fight with a billionaire rogue landlord for operating unlicensed houses in multiple occupation. Represented by the London Renters Union, the tenants took landlord companies owned by the billionaire to court. They argued that the lack of proper licensing left residents vulnerable to fire risks and other hazardous conditions, thanks to totally inadequate safety measures. During the trial, which took place in March, the judge was pretty clear about the character of the billionaire, saying, quote, "The respondent can only be characterized as a rogue landlord." So who exactly is this billionaire rogue landlord? John Christodoulou is a 59-year-old Cypriot property developer based in tax haven, Monaco. Valued at £2.5 billion by the Sunday Times Rich List, Christodoulou is the founder of the Janus Group, which controls hotels, offices, and residential towers in Manchester and London. These include the two 170-flat blocks in Hackney, which are owned by two companies, ultimately belonging to Christodoulou himself. Now, this isn't Christodoulou's first run-in with his tenants. During the COVID pandemic lockdowns, more than 100 of them requested 20% rent relief and a guarantee that none would be evicted during what was, in fact, a global health crisis. Christodoulou's letting agent was not sympathetic. Instead, the agents told tenants they should use lunch and holiday savings to pay the full rent. Worse, the letting agent, Tower Key Properties, asked the tenants to spare a little thought for their poor billionaire landlord, writing this. When all of this is taken into account, in most cases we believe the impact on disposable income will be minimal, and there is therefore no justification for any reduction in rent, especially considering that whilst tenants are isolating, the wear and tear in properties is increasing, which will be at the cost of the landlord. So, save up what you would have spent on pret-a-manger and don't worry about rent relief. But in the meantime, please don't move around your flat too much because you might increase the wear and tear while you're trapped in there. Earlier today, I spoke to Jordan Osserman, one of the tenants who organised the case against Christodoulou's companies. I began by asking him to run us through the history of the case.
So it is an incredible victory, although we'll probably touch on in a moment. My feelings about it are a bit mixed because we don't yet know if we're going to get paid. But the battle has been really long running. It started all the way back at the beginning of the pandemic in 2020 when I was living in a building of warehouses that included around 150 flats. And all of us kind of got together to ask the landlord for some help on rent during the pandemic and a guarantee that none of us would be evicted because a number of us were losing income and we were very afraid about our housing conditions while we were going through lockdown and COVID was just kind of happening. And back then, we received a very hostile response from the landlord who basically told us that we could use the money that we'd saved on our lunches by not eating out as much to pay the rent in full and offered us no kind of reassurance about whether we might be evicted. And as a result of that, that really pushed us into organizing to defend ourselves and to carry on demanding better treatment. And through that process, we learned that the person in charge of the company that owns our building is a billionaire based in Monaco who has a long history of disputes with tenants and leaseholders. And we also learned that the building we were living in didn't have the required HMO licenses that the landlord was supposed to have, and also had some pretty severe issues with disrepair and with fire safety and with that kind of thing. So we moved into trying to get compensation. We learned that we were eligible to file rent repayment orders in order to get rent back because we were paying rent for living in a property that was unlicensed. And a number of us went through that process. My own flat, there were a few of us living together there. We filed the first case and we won that case back in 2022. We never actually got paid. So we're still fighting for the landlord to actually pay the money that the court mandated he pay us. But after we won that case, we organized with other tenants to help 46 of them in total file their own cases. And finally, just last week, we had the result for that. And That took a very long time, partly because of the landlord's sort of legal maneuvers to avoid the case and to avoid accountability, and partly just the way that the courts move very slowly.
So to clarify, the landlord's name is John Christodoulou. He's a Monaco-based billionaire. Now, one of your co-claimants in this case told the Times that he had actually been obstructive, said slowed things down in various ways, and you sort of hinted at it there. Can you tell us some of the ways in which he tried to prevent you from winning this victory or from getting to court in the first place?
The landlord has used a series of shell companies, all of which are ultimately owned by him, to sort of move money around, closing down one company that we have a case against so that we're unable to sue that company. And then we have to go through the process of restoring that company. And even after we win the case, the company has no assets. And so it becomes very hard to actually get the company to pay us. I mean, it's quite an absurd thing and something that I didn't really realize was possible until I went through this process. You kind of think if a court says you have to pay some money, as an ordinary person, you think, well, I've got to pay that money. But when it comes to someone who's a billionaire, they have all kinds of sort of legal mechanisms to avoid paying the money that they have to pay.
Yeah, I think this is what the super rich like to call structuring their wealth, finding all kinds of ways to avoid penalties, taxes, fees, that kind of thing. And I guess this moves us to the next question, which is that you said you hadn't been paid yet for the first case. Some concerns were expressed by some of your other tenants about the possibility of being paid this time. Why are you worried about that?
Well, the companies that we won the cases against are now in liquidation. So the landlord essentially sold the property to another company that he owns that has the exact same structure as the one that we were paying rent to. And now the company that we've won this case against has no assets. And we actually did go to a meeting with the liquidator, whose job is to try and figure out, where the money needs to go, who's owed money, and how it's going to be paid. And it wasn't the most encouraging meeting. The liquidator essentially told us if we were owed a greater sum of money, we might have a better chance at winning it. But it didn't look very good from his perspective that we'd actually recover this money that the court said that the court said we're owed. Now, it seems completely insane because at the end of the day, we know there is a very wealthy man who continues to collect rent on this building and on many other properties, who is perfectly capable of paying us the money we've won. But it is a very legally challenging process. And so we're having to both put a lot of effort into a legal strategy, but also into a political strategy to make it so that he has no other choice but to pay us the money that we won.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? Like the liquidator saying, if it had been more money, he might have paid, even though this amount of money is a lot to you and your co-claimant. You mentioned a political strategy there. What did you have in mind?
From the very beginning of this campaign, we've been working very closely with a wide range of supporters, and we've been working very closely with the London Renters Union, with our local MP, Diane Abbott. Sadiq Khan has taken an interest in the case. A number of us have since moved house and have our own, current local MPs who've written letters in support of us. So we've really tried to make this, not just about our particular concerns as tenants, but a sort of a wider campaign around issues of housing justice in London. And as a result, we have been putting a lot of pressure on the landlord. If you have a look at his Wikipedia page, you'll see the controversy section has become very long now. And that's partly because there's been protests, there's been politicians, there's been media, lots of coverage around this campaign that's been really essential to it.
Sounds like a very important part of your strategy to get that money back. Now, you said that you were represented by the London Renters Union. What kind of difference did that make to the success of your case?
Working with the London Renters Union has been essential to the whole campaign from the very beginning. Some of our earliest meetings, which we held over Zoom during lockdown, we took a decision to join the London Renters Union and to campaign through that. That's connected us to sort of wider housing struggles. We turn up for protests that the LRU organizes, and LRU members turn up to the protests that we organize. So we've been, showing solidarity and receiving solidarity. One of the things we agreed on when we first launched these cases was that we were going to set aside a percentage of the money that we win to a community fund to support one another and to support other renters. Being part of a renters union has been sort of fundamental. There's kind of no other way we could have done this if it wasn't part of a wider organization like the LRU.
Yeah, Jordan, you're quite right there. Join a union, help others, and then eventually they'll help you too when you need it. Is there anything else our audience can do to help with your case?
Please share the news about our case. Have a look at our website, summerfordgroverenters.com. And if any of the viewers here happen to be an expert on companies law and can give us some advice, you can reach out to us at hello@summerfordgroverenters.com. We'd love to hear from you.
Harriet, I want to bring you in here because you've written about landlords and landlordism. In fact, there's a story that you recently wrote about was how there are now more landlord companies than any other businesses on our high streets. Those are landlords presumably creating companies to put their assets into in order to avoid various taxes. Do you think this kind of strategy used by the billionaire to avoid paying what he owes his tenants might now be adopted by your common or garden landlord, now that they're using companies rather than having their assets attached directly to themselves?
Yeah, I mean, it's entirely possible, but I do think that billionaires and millionaires, I guess, operate on a totally different plane of existence from the rest of us. They have access to resources that we can't even imagine. I did write a story recently about landlordism for Novara Media, and it's now true that buy-to-let businesses are the most common type of company registered in the UK. It's not just on the high street. Most of the businesses that operate in this country are landlords, and that came because tax rules were changed in 2017. So as an individual, you wouldn't get certain tax breaks for owning property anymore. So that's why we believe that all these landlords have turned themselves into limited companies instead. It's to avoid paying their fair share of tax. I will raise up my hands and say that I am a bit Gary Stevenson pilled at the moment because I just finished the trading game. But he, and as a friend of Novara Media, he's absolutely right when he talks about how we are now getting to a point where the poor and the middle earners are being totally squeezed out of this economy. The rich are getting richer and they get to buy up all the assets. They get to buy up everything, and then we have to pay them for somewhere to live. And I think that the key thing about landlordism is that it's actually not a job. I'm the last person to sort of sing the praises of work if it's not good work or work for its own sake. I think that you have to have decent, dignified work in order for it to feel like a positive thing for your life. But we've got the government, the Labour government, going after people on benefits and people who are severely disabled to try and claw back some of their benefit money to put back into our economy. And yet you have landlords, house prices spiraling absolutely out of control. Gary Stevenson has predicted that they won't go down. They will continue to rise. And he said that he reckons they're going to double in 5 to 6 years. I can absolutely see it. It's like a runaway train and the rest of us just get squeezed out. And on a personal level, I hear my colleague Aaron Bastani talking about the relief and the sense of calm and like a sense of peace he felt after finally walking into a home that he owned. And I fear that I will never feel that. I've lived in more than 10 privately rented properties since I left home. There is at 18, there's something incredibly unsafe and destabilizing about constantly moving, always being at the behest of a landlord, knowing that you could be the victim of a no-fault eviction at any particular moment because the landlord wants to sell the property, not to you, or move one of their family members in there. It's an incredibly anxiety-inducing and destabilizing way to live. And we all have to live somewhere. So when you have a house, you're either paying off an asset for yourself, you're putting that money into something that you're going to own and that you could potentially pass on to your kids, or you're putting that money into the pockets of somebody else so they can buy up more assets and make it less likely that you'll ever be able to get one of your own. And they can sit back and allow you to fund whatever they want to do, their lifestyle. I mean, I'm sure that the landlord in this billionaire renters case is having a pretty nice time of it at the moment, even with this ruling. And he's obviously trying very hard with his companies to make sure that none of that money actually goes anywhere near those renters, that you can see the shades of different companies that are being created and liquidated. But the only other thing I'd say on this, and yeah, I probably have run on because I could talk about landlords and housing inequality for a really long time, is that it shows the power of organising for tenants. And I just think that's absolutely vital, and fair play to all those lads from Hackney.
Yeah, fair play to them indeed. I do think, though, that I don't think they're going to get their money from that billionaire, unfortunately. And that's because I think the law is structured to protect the rich and not to protect normal people. I mean, it's no surprise to me at all that the law allows very rich people to form companies within companies within companies to squirrel away their assets so that they remain untouchable. And when they are nearly touchable, it's perfectly legal for them to dissolve the company, declare it bankrupt, and just start a new one and stick the assets in there instead. That's all a legal framework which is set up for the rich and only for the rich, because, of course, that legal setting is of no use to anybody ordinary. In fact, it does exactly what's being done in the case of this billionaire. It stops them from actually being able to pursue the justice that they're owed. Are Elon Musk's White House days numbered? According to a report from Politico, they are. US President Donald Trump has told his inner circle, including the cabinet, that Elon Musk will soon be leaving government. This is from that Politico story. The president remains pleased with Musk and his Department of Government Efficiency initiative, but both men have decided in recent days that it will soon be time for Musk to return to his business and take on a supporting role, according to 3 Trump insiders who were granted anonymity to describe the evolving relationship. We still love each other, but our lives are just moving in different directions, and we hope to have a good friendship for the sake of the kids. Now, that's a pretty sharp turn in events. Just a month ago, White House insiders were saying Musk was, quote, here to stay, despite strong misgivings from some of Trump's cabinet. I guess April really is the cruelest month, because the Politico piece goes on to say this. Musk's looming retreat comes as some Trump administration insiders and many outside allies have become frustrated with his unpredictability and increasingly view the billionaire as a political liability, a dynamic that was thrown into stark relief on Tuesday when a conservative judge Musk vocally supported lost his bid for a Wisconsin Supreme Court seat by 10 points. Just to point out, that's after Elon Musk had organized a rally where he handed out $2 million checks to people who signed a petition in favor of the conservative judge. And it continues with this. Musk's defenders inside the administration believe that the time is right for a transition, given their view that there's only so much more he can cut from government agencies without shaving too close to the bone. But many others say he's an unpredictable, unmanageable force who has had issues communicating his plans with cabinet secretaries and through the White House chain of command led by Chief of Staff Susie Wiles, frequently sending them into a frenzy with unexpected and off-message comments on X, his social media platform, including sharing unvetted and uncoordinated plans to gut federal agencies. Harriet, the first Trump administration was marked by spats and splinters over power in the White House. The second administration looks, to be honest, a lot more disciplined. Do you think we're going to see the same here, or is it really just the natural end of Musk's time?
Stephen, I really want to be able to say the girls are fighting. I hope the girls are fighting. But I think that also maybe some people have been allowed to get a little bit too big for their boots. Obviously, Elon Musk is a huge personality and he's been referred to as President Musk. I think there were a lot of people betting on when Trump would sort of have had enough of that, when he would decide that, Elon Musk was overshadowing him, maybe like stepping out too far into the limelight. And we all know that Musk really loves his big set pieces, his chainsaw, his strange coming out in a cheese hat, giving away $1 million checks. Maybe Trump's just kind of had enough of it and is trying to sideline him. Or maybe this is a case of protest working, because we've seen in the last couple of hours since this this report has been made. We don't know if it's definite yet, but Tesla stock is actually rising again. And obviously, over the last couple of months, there's been a real rise in protest action that's been directed at Tesla. So people are attacking dealerships, vandalizing cars, putting stickers on Tesla vehicles. Even in London, you might have seen some anti-Musk stickers on Teslas, and some from Tesla owners themselves, some from people, Tesla owners like trying to distance themselves from Elon Musk, and then some from people who just want to express their displeasure at folks owning what has been dubbed the swastika. And I really do think that Musk cares very deeply about this stuff. The psychology of Elon Musk is genuinely quite fascinating, and I highly recommend Matt Bernstein's A Bit Fruity podcast episode on this. Musk desperately wants to be liked, and he wants to be cool, and the way he uses his social media platform X, I quite enjoyed it when it was Twitter. I probably used it too much then. Really, he's given me a gift in terms of just stepping back from that social media landscape and reclaiming some of my time. But yeah, the way he uses X, you can really see that he just wants to be a cool kid. And unfortunately, he's got more wealth and more assets and more power, essentially, in that way than anybody else on Earth. And then he was allowed to go into Trump's government and slash federal spending and take people's jobs away, essentially. But yeah, I think that losing this Wisconsin court race, and after he spent $25 million on it, has been a real blow for him. And maybe he's realizing that his unpopularity in government is not something that he wants. And he's also openly said that his government role has made his companies take a hit. So in the most coldly capitalist sense, maybe he's also thinking, I need to get back and focus on the task of making my businesses profitable again. Not really that he needs the money, and because we all know that he has more money than any human being should ever rightly hoard to themselves. There's that famous post that's like that says that if one monkey hoarded all the bananas, the other monkeys would kill it, because it's just so bad for their whole species. One person hoarding all that wealth, essentially. Definitely not advocating for that in the case of Elon Musk, but I think that most of us can agree that billionaires are bad for humanity, they're bad for the world, they're bad for the environment, and that wealth is unnatural and probably should be redistributed.
I wonder if the reason is just a bit simpler. I mean, I'm not saying that you're wrong, but, Musk went over to Wisconsin representing Trump to get a win, and he got a massive loss instead. And Trump hates to lose, and he hates to be seen to lose. I should say that Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, has online called this story garbage. But speaking of cool kids, the first person I'll be looking at when I get off the set is Musk's cool kid daughter, Vivian, on Threads for her reaction to this news, which I think will be amazing. Harriet, thank you so much for joining me, and thank you for sharing your Novara Live co-host debut with me.
Thank you so much, Stephen. I can't think of anyone I'd rather have spent it with. Thank you to all the viewers for bearing with me on my first co-hosting gig. I really hope to be back here in this chair again soon.
And thanks also to the viewers for bearing with me. As you know, Michael Walker has been away, so you've been seeing a lot of me. You're probably sick of seeing me. I'm sick of seeing me. But I want to let you know Michael will be back very, very soon. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Come back tomorrow for another live show at 6 p.m. Until then, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.